Before we begin, make sure to comment where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe if you believe stories of courage and dignity deserve to be heard. The piano in the corner of Kingsley's, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, played a soft tune that barely touched the air, until a 10-year-old boy rose from his chair and stopped the room cold. Lucas's braces gleamed under the chandelier as he shuffled forward, his small hand stretching toward the waitress who had just cleared his father's table. She froze, tray in hand. Diana Johnson. 5 years working here, always invisible, always careful. Now every pair of eyes in the room turned to her. Forks hovered above plates, whispers slipped between tables. "What is he doing?" a woman hissed. "Someone stop him." The manager stormed forward, his polished shoes sharp against the floor. "Mr. Montgomery," he said, voice slicing the silence. "Control your son. This is a restaurant, not a dance hall. Our staff are not here to entertain." Richard Montgomery, billionaire investor, used to commanding boardrooms in cities alike, felt his jaw tighten. This was the first time he'd brought Lucas out since the accident, since those braces had become part of his boy's legs. He had thought one quiet dinner would be safe. He was wrong. "Lucas, sit down," he ordered quietly, trying to pull the boy back into his chair. But Lucas didn't move. His hand hung in the air, trembling yet steady in purpose. Diana set her tray down slowly, untying her apron. "I can't dance in this," she said softly, not to the father, not to the manager, but to Lucas. She folded it neatly on the tray, then looked at the boy as though no one else existed. "What are you doing?" Richard demanded, his voice low but sharp. "I'm accepting an invitation, sir," Diana replied, meeting his eyes without fear. The restaurant gasped as if the walls themselves had ears. Lucas dragged his foot forward, the screech of metal filling the room. Every stumble echoed. Every eye judged. "She's going to be fired," someone whispered. "Tomorrow." Diana matched his pace. She didn't guide, didn't push. She followed. One step. Another. The third. Lucas's face transformed, not shame, not fear, but pride. For the first time since the accident, he was leading. A memory sliced through Richard's chest, his late wife, Elizabeth, swaying with Lucas in their living room. "It's not about perfection," she had whispered back then. "It's about connection." The manager leaned in close. "Say the word, Mr. Montgomery, and she's done here." But Richard stayed silent, watching his son's halting dance carve truth into the air. When the music paused, Diana guided Lucas back to the table. She released his hand like it was fragile glass. "Thank you for asking me," she told him gently. "You led beautifully." She turned to leave. But Richard, against every instinct, stopped her. "Wait. Your name?" "Diana Johnson." He pulled a card from his jacket, his hand betraying the slightest tremor. "My office. 10 a.m. tomorrow." Gasps rippled across the room. The manager blinked, diners craned their necks, whispers surged. Diana took the card, her hand steady, her eyes unreadable. As she walked away, Lucas looked at his father. "Why did you do that?" His voice wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Richard had no answer. For the first time in years, the man who owned skyscrapers and companies felt cornered by something he couldn't buy. And it was only the beginning. The morning light bounced off Montgomery Tower's glass walls, a monument to wealth and control. Inside, the lobby hummed with polished shoes and hushed phone calls. Diana Johnson stepped in, clutching her worn purse, her best blouse pressed as neatly as she could manage. She looked like she belonged anywhere but here, and that was exactly what the receptionist's eyes told her. "Name?" the woman asked, crisp and cool. "Diana Johnson." "I have an appointment with Mr. Montgomery." A phone call, a pause, then a curt nod. 18th floor. "Miss Winters will escort you." The elevator doors shut her inside with her own reflection. Diana didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that silence could be armor. When the doors opened, a woman with razor-straight posture and sharp glasses waited. "Follow me," she said. Her voice held no warmth. "Mr. Montgomery will see you shortly." They walked past gleaming glass offices where men in tailored suits looked up with curiosity. A black woman moving through Montgomery's executive floor was rare enough to turn heads. In the waiting room, Miss Winters finally spoke, her tone laced with quiet condescension. "You must realize you'll never work at Kingsley's again. That's how it works. Clients like him make one call, and people like you," she paused deliberately, "disappear." Diana's eyes held steady. "And where exactly do people like me belong, Miss Winters?" The assistant opened her mouth, but the phone on her desk rang, sparing her from answering. She replaced the receiver. "He'll see you now." The office was vast, windows stretching floor to ceiling, Manhattan laid out like Richard Montgomery's personal chessboard. He stood with his back to her, gazing out at the skyline as if the city were his property. Only when she said, "Mr. Montgomery," did he turn. "Miss Johnson," he said, voice controlled, unreadable. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Sit." The silence that followed was deliberate, the kind he had used to break board members and rivals. Diana recognized it. She refused to fill it. Finally, he spoke. "Do you have a background?" "In what sense?" "Education. Bachelor's in Child Development. NYU. Began a master's in special education." Had to stop. A flicker crossed his face, surprise, perhaps. "And now you work as a waitress." "I work 3 jobs. The restaurant. A bookstore on weekends. Tutoring when I can." He opened a folder on his desk. "I had my people look into you. Freedom Steps. You founded it 6 years ago. A dance program for children with disabilities. Nearly bankrupt." Diana didn't blink. "That's correct." Richard's tone sharpened. "Why didn't you ask me for help last night? Instead, you humiliated me in front of an entire restaurant." "I didn't humiliate you," she said calmly. "I accepted an invitation from a boy who wanted to dance." He leaned forward. "I want you to work for me. As a therapeutic companion for Lucas. You did in 3 steps what a dozen specialists haven't managed in 2 years." Diana rose slowly. "No." The word hung heavy in the air. Richard, a man unaccustomed to refusal, blinked. "You'd rather scrape by than accept 5 times your current salary?" "I'd rather keep my dignity," she replied. "And Lucas deserves more than someone you've bought to pretend they care." From her purse, she pulled a small card and placed it on his desk. "Freedom Steps. Classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. 4 o'clock. The first class is free." For once, Richard Montgomery had nothing to say. He stared at the card as she walked to the door, realizing this was a kind of power his money couldn't touch. The Bronx Community Center sat on a worn street corner, its brick walls faded, its paint peeling. Inside, though, color bloomed. Handmade posters stretched across the walls, "Your rhythm, your rules, and every step counts," scrawled in markers by children who called this place their own. The floor was polished but scarred with years of movement. The smell of coffee mixed with the faint tang of cleaning solution. Diana moved easily through the space, greeting parents, adjusting the speaker, checking the list. Children arrived one by one, some in wheelchairs, others with walkers, braces, or prosthetics. Each was greeted by name. Laughter filled the air before class even began. Zoe hurried over, cardigan swishing, eyes wide. "There's a Bentley outside." Diana didn't even look up from the attendance sheet. Then he came. The car door opened slowly. Lucas stepped out first, his braces clicking against the pavement, his eyes darting nervously. Behind him, Richard Montgomery emerged, casual sweater and pressed slacks, his presence jarring against the chipped sidewalk. Parents waiting in the lobby whispered, eyes following him. His wealth was a uniform he couldn't shed. Inside, Lucas froze as he saw children already moving to music, spinning wheelchairs, tapping crutches, braces clinking in rhythm. The room looked chaotic, but the kids' faces glowed with freedom. He had never seen anything like it. Richard shifted uncomfortably, arms crossed. "This looks unstructured." "There is structure," Diana answered evenly. "Just not the kind you're used to." She knelt beside Lucas. "Would you like to join them?" Lucas's eyes flicked to his father. Richard hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Go on. I'll be right here." Lucas stepped forward, cautious at first, then a little bolder as he matched his steps with another boy using a crutch. His braces squealed with each move, but the sound didn't matter here. It blended into the music. Zoe guided Richard to a chair near the wall. "The first day is hardest," she said softly. "For him?" Richard asked. "For you," she replied. The door opened again. An older woman entered, her gray hair braided neatly, her cane ornate, her presence commanding. She greeted several children before fixing her sharp eyes on Richard. "Mr. Montgomery." He rose slightly. "I know you. You've sent me proposals." "3," she corrected. "All rejected." She extended her hand. "Dr. Elaine Mercer. Neuroscience, Harvard, now retired. I oversee the research side of this program." Richard's brow furrowed. "Research? This is just a dance class." Diana returned, watching Lucas laugh for the first time in months. "Freedom Steps is more than dance. It's a rehabilitation method built on movement autonomy. No commands. No corrections. Just children leading their own bodies." Dr. Mercer leaned on her cane. "We're tracking how free movement reshapes neural pathways. The early results are groundbreaking." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then why isn't this funded?" "Because men like you," Diana said evenly, "never bothered to read our proposals." The words stung more than he expected. He turned back to Lucas, who was stumbling but smiling, cheeks flushed with effort. For a moment, Richard's world of skyscrapers, numbers, and power contracts felt small compared to the clumsy rhythm of his son's steps. For the first time in 2 years, Lucas wasn't broken. He was simply moving. And that was enough to shake everything Richard thought he knew. That Thursday, the room felt different. Parents leaned closer to the walls, children buzzed with energy, and Diana's eyes flicked toward the door more than once. Richard sat stiff in his chair, jacket folded neatly on his lap. He didn't like surprises, and he noticed too late that today was full of them. The side doors opened, and in came a wave of reporters. Cameras, microphones, notebooks. Their badges caught the fluorescent light as they fanned out across the back wall. Richard shot to his feet, fury flashing in his eyes. "What is this?" Zoe hurried over with a folded newspaper. The headline across the front read, "Revolutionary Rehabilitation Method Gains Momentum." Photographs of children at Freedom Steps filled the page. "We published preliminary results this morning," she explained. "The press wanted to see it." Richard snapped his gaze to Diana. "You used my son for this circus?" Her voice was calm. "No. I gave him space. He chose to stand. He chose to dance. All I did was follow." Before Richard could respond, the music cut off. A hush rippled through the children. All eyes turned to the center of the floor where Lucas stood, one brace unclipped and resting against the wall. His arms stretched out, his legs trembling, but his face locked in concentration. Richard took a step forward, panic rising. "Lucas." Diana moved in front of him, voice low but steady. "Wait. Watch." Lucas bent his knee, shifted his weight. His foot wavered, then landed. One step. Shaky, small, but his own. The sound of it meeting the floor was louder than the shudder of a dozen cameras. The children erupted first, clapping and shouting his name. Parents joined in, tears streaming, voices breaking. Reporters leaned forward, flashes sparking like fireworks. Richard froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. His son had just done what specialists said was impossible for 2 more years. Lucas looked up, beaming, sweat on his forehead but pride radiating from him. Diana's voice reached Richard softly. "It's not about perfect steps. It's about first steps." A reporter broke through the crowd, microphone extended. "Mr. Montgomery, can you comment? Is it true your foundation rejected this program 3 times? Every head turned. The billionaire who had never admitted weakness in public was cornered. He could retreat into anger and pride, or he could stand where his son had just stood, unsteady but true. Richard glanced at Lucas, who was laughing with the other children, oblivious to the tension. For once, he didn't see fragility. He saw strength. And he knew the answer before the question was even finished. "You want to know the hardest thing for someone like me?" he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Admitting when we're wrong." The room went silent. Cameras clicked. Parents leaned forward. "The Montgomery Foundation will fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years," he continued, surprising even himself. "And we'll build a permanent rehabilitation center, on the condition that Ms. Johnson and Dr. Mercer retain full control. No interference. None." Gasps spread through the crowd. Zoe's hand flew to her mouth. Diana's eyes flickered, steady but stunned. And Lucas, still flushed with triumph, clapped for himself, the sound pure and unashamed. Richard crouched beside him, ignoring the cameras, ignoring the world. "That was your step, Lucas," he whispered. "All yours." And for the first time, Richard Montgomery didn't feel like a man in charge. He felt like a man finally learning to follow. 3 months later, the corner lot in the Bronx was alive with the noise of bulldozers, drills, and shouting foremen. Dust clouded the air as workers poured the foundation for something new, the Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. A banner stretched across the chain-link fence, funded by the Montgomery Foundation. Children pressed their faces to the fence, watching the machines with wide eyes. Lucas was among them, notebook in hand, scribbling sketches of what he thought the classroom should look like, mirrors here, music stands there, ramps curling through the hallways. The workers treated him like part of the crew, nodding when he pointed to spots on the floor plan. Richard stood nearby, suit traded for rolled-up sleeves, trying to blend into a world he had never known. For once, no one moved aside for him. He wasn't in charge here. He was a guest in a movement that was bigger than his name. Diana arrived in sneakers, clipboard tucked under her arm, checking every detail with sharp eyes. She paused when she saw Richard standing awkwardly by the blueprints. "Didn't think you'd come back," she said. "I never thought I'd be studying brain plasticity at midnight either," he admitted, rubbing at his eyes. Scientific journals with sticky notes now littered his desk at home. "But here we are." Her look was steady, testing. "Is this penance? A public image repair?" He hesitated. Lucas asked to have his second brace removed last week. His therapist said it was impossible. 2 years too soon. "But you told me she was wrong." "And she was," Diana said quietly. He nodded, almost humbled. "That's why I'm here. Not the cameras. Not the board. Him." Over the next weeks, Lucas returned to the site again and again, sometimes with other kids from the program, sometimes with just his father. He climbed ramps, tested the width of doorways, even suggested where the windows should face. Workers started measuring by his cane, asking him to check spacing. His laughter bounced across the site, stronger than the machines. One evening, long after the crews had left, Richard stood alone in the unfinished hall. Bare concrete walls surrounded him, beams stretching across the ceiling, but he could already see it alive, children moving freely, music spilling into every corner, pride replacing shame. For the first time, one of his projects didn't feel like an empire. It felt like a promise. Diana found him there, dust streaking her clothes, hair pulled back after a long day. She set her clipboard aside. "You've changed," she said softly. "Or maybe I'm just learning," Richard answered. Then his voice dropped. "You never accepted my apology." "Because you never gave one," she replied simply. "I redirected money. I funded your program." "Isn't that?" "That's not an apology," she interrupted. "That's compensation." "Different thing." The words hung in the empty hall. Richard exhaled, slow, unsteady. "Then I'm sorry." It was raw. Not smooth. But real. From outside, Lucas's laugh carried into the hall as he tested a half-built ramp, fearless in his wobble. Diana smiled faintly. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore." "No," Richard agreed, his eyes softening. "But he still needs me here." And for once, showing up felt harder and far more important than any deal he had ever closed. 6 months later, the doors of the new Freedom Steps Center swung open for the first time. The air inside was charged with excitement. Parents filled the chairs along the walls, children moved freely across the gleaming floor, and sunlight poured through wide windows, bouncing off the mirrors that stretched across the practice halls. The walls were alive with murals the kids had painted themselves, bright colors, uneven letters spelling every move counts in your rhythm, your rules. Richard stood near the back, out of habit. He was used to being the man everyone noticed. Tonight, he wasn't the focus. Families weren't whispering about him, investors weren't waiting for his nod. All eyes were on the children. And that felt right. Lucas walked out with 3 other kids, 2 girls in wheelchairs and a boy with a prosthetic leg. The music rose, and the 4 of them began their routine. Not perfect, not polished. But every movement was theirs. Lucas's brace was lighter now, hidden under his pants, but his steps carried a steadiness that hadn't been there before. His smile was wide, unguarded. Richard's throat tightened as he clapped along with the others. He remembered the nights in hospital rooms, the doctors explaining limits, the months where Lucas refused to try. Watching him now, moving with joy instead of fear, made those memories feel like another lifetime. Diana stood at the edge of the floor, arms folded loosely, a small smile tugging at her lips. She leaned toward Richard without looking away from the performance. "He doesn't need you to steady him anymore." Richard swallowed, eyes never leaving his son. "No," he said quietly. "But he still needs me here." When the music ended, the applause shook the walls. Parents wiped tears, children cheered, and Lucas bowed dramatically before racing to help a younger boy stand. His hand was steady, his encouragement patient. Richard saw it, the same gift Diana had given him at the restaurant. The gift of letting someone else lead. A reporter slipped through the crowd, recorder ready. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, "what does this moment mean for you?" Richard looked at her, then back at Lucas, who was now laughing with the other children, cane forgotten against the wall. "Pride," he said. "Not in what he's overcome, but in what he's building for others." "And what's the greatest lesson you've learned from all this?" He took a breath, voice carrying across the hall without effort. "That real leaders aren't the ones dragging others along a path they think is best. Real leaders follow when someone else shows the way." The crowd hushed, then clapped again, louder than before. The words weren't polished like a boardroom pitch. They were raw. Costly. Honest. Later, as the crowd began to leave, Richard stayed back, leaning against the wall, watching Lucas guide a girl through her steps. Diana joined him, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "You sound different these days," she said. He almost smiled. "Maybe because I finally mean it." And for once, Richard Montgomery felt lighter, not because he had built something new, but because he had finally learned how to step aside. By the time spring rolled around, Freedom Steps was no longer just a single center in the Bronx. 3 new branches had opened, one in Chicago, one in Atlanta, one in Philadelphia. Each one looked different on the outside, but inside they carried the same heartbeat, bright murals on the walls, music spilling through every room, children leading movements no one thought possible. Hospitals had started to take notice. Doctors and therapists who once dismissed Diana's ideas were now calling her in to speak at conferences. She hated the microphones and the bright lights, but she went anyway. Her speeches always started the same way: "It's not about teaching children to follow. It's about giving them space to lead." Lucas had grown taller, his braces replaced with a single lightweight support he used only on long days. He was attending regular school now, refusing to be set apart. Teachers said he wasn't just keeping up, he was excelling. At Freedom Steps, he had become something no specialist could have predicted: a youth spokesperson. Standing in front of kids in wheelchairs and walkers, he told them plainly, "Don't worry about falling. Falling means you're trying. Trying means you're alive." His words carried more weight than any adult lecture ever could. Richard often sat in the back of those talks, blending into the crowd. The billionaire who had once demanded center stage was now a quiet figure with a notebook, scribbling terms he barely understood. Neuroscience articles littered his desk at home, pages flagged with sticky notes. He called Diana at odd hours, not to control her, but to ask questions, to learn. For the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to be the smartest man in the room. He was trying to be a better father. One evening, he stopped by the Bronx Center after hours. The building was quiet, except for the sound of a broom sliding across the floor. Diana was there, sweeping the hall herself because the janitor had called out. She didn't look surprised to see him. "I've signed off on skyscrapers twice this size without caring what they were used for," Richard said, leaning against the doorway. "But this place, this is the only investment that feels like it matters." Diana rested on the broom handle, studying him. "Because it isn't yours to own. It belongs to them." She nodded toward the photos taped to the wall, children smiling, each one with a handwritten note about what Freedom Steps meant to them. He stepped closer, scanning the photos. "You were right," he admitted. "I never apologized. I just threw money at the problem." She waited, her silence pressing him forward. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words heavier than he expected. "Not as a businessman. As a father who didn't listen. As a man who got it wrong." For the first time, Diana saw no calculation in his eyes. Just truth. She nodded slowly. "Apology accepted. But you'll have to keep showing up." He almost smiled. "That, I can do." Across the hall, Lucas's laugh echoed as he tested a new speaker system with Zoe. Richard turned toward the sound, his face softening. "That laugh," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "It's worth more than every tower I ever built." And for the first time, he believed it without a shadow of doubt. The summer air was heavy with warmth the night the new Freedom Steps headquarters opened. The building didn't rise like a skyscraper or gleam like Montgomery Tower. It was brick and glass, wide and welcoming, with ramps curling like ribbons across the entryway and murals painted by the children themselves. The crowd that filled it wasn't made of investors or CEOs. It was parents, families, and kids who had found a home here. Inside, the lobby pulsed with music. Reporters clustered along the walls, cameras balanced on their shoulders, while children zipped past in wheelchairs or leaned on crutches, laughing and daring each other to race down the hall. Richard stood near the entrance, hands folded behind his back. Once, his presence would have bent a room. Tonight, he blended into it. The lights dimmed, and Diana stepped on stage to welcome everyone. She wasn't a polished speaker, but her voice carried strength. "This building isn't ours," she said. "It belongs to the children who walk through these doors. And it belongs to every parent who believes that their child deserves to lead." The audience erupted in applause. Then Lucas appeared with 3 other children, 2 girls in chairs, a boy with a prosthetic leg. The music swelled. Their routine wasn't about precision. It was about freedom. Lucas's steps were steady now, his brace almost hidden. His face glowed with pride as he spun and steadied one of the girls, matching her pace like Diana had once matched his. The audience clapped along, tears shining in the eyes of parents who had been told never one too many times. Richard's chest tightened. He thought of hospital corridors, whispered diagnoses, months of silence at home. Now his son was standing tall, leading, laughing. When the performance ended, the applause shook the walls. Lucas bowed, then darted toward his father. "Did you see me?" he asked breathlessly. Richard knelt, ignoring the flash of cameras. "I saw everything," he said. "And I've never been prouder." A reporter slipped through the crowd. "Mr. Montgomery, what has this journey taught you?" Richard straightened slowly, eyes moving from the reporter to his son, then across the hall to Diana. He thought of that night in the restaurant, of her refusing to bow to him, of Lucas's first clumsy steps, of bulldozers breaking ground on a dream. He let the silence stretch, not out of strategy, but out of honesty. "It taught me that real leaders aren't the ones who drag others down paths they choose," he said, voice strong but stripped of performance. "Real leaders are the ones who know when to follow." The room went still, then burst into applause. Some clapped for the words. Others for the man finally saying them. But most clapped for the children dancing across the floor, proving that no step was too small to matter. Diana caught Richard's eye from across the stage, giving him the faintest nod. Not gratitude, not approval, just recognition that he had finally spoken the truth aloud. As the night wound down, families spilled into the streets, children still buzzing with energy. Richard lingered by the door, coat in hand, watching Lucas laugh with his friends. For once, he didn't feel the need to leave early, or to be seen, or to control anything at all. He was exactly where he needed to be, just another parent, showing up. By spring, the rhythm of freedom steps had become part of daily life in the Bronx and beyond. The new centers in Chicago, Atlanta, and Philadelphia were thriving, each carrying the same spirit: bright murals, music in every corner, and children free to move without judgment. Parents who once felt isolated now lingered in lounges, swapping stories, forming friendships. Lucas had grown taller, his face leaner, his confidence unmistakable. At the Bronx Center, he often stood before a group of younger kids, his cane resting nearby, forgotten most of the time. "Don't worry about falling," he told them, steady and sure. "Everybody falls. What matters is getting back up. That's the part that counts." The children listened with wide eyes, nodding in unison. Coming from him, the words carried weight no adult could match. Richard watched from the doorway, notebook in hand, unnoticed by most. The billionaire who once ruled rooms with silence now sat quietly, scribbling as though he were the student. He no longer measured life by stock reports or quarterly gains. He measured it by the way Lucas laughed, by the clumsy courage of children trying steps the world told them were impossible. Diana appeared beside him, clipboard tucked under her arm as always. "He's becoming a leader," she said softly. Richard nodded, his gaze fixed on his son. "Better than I ever was at his age. Better than I am now." "You've changed too," she said, her voice matter of fact. "You keep showing up. That matters." He let the words hang before answering. "I used to think money fixed everything. That it was the answer to every problem. But money was just a shield. Showing up without it, that's harder." "And worth it," Diana replied. That evening, when the class ended and the children scattered home, Richard stayed behind with Diana and Zoe, folding mats and stacking chairs. It was quiet, simple work, no spotlight, no cameras, but he did it without hesitation. Zoe raised her brows as she watched him tuck away the last chair. "Never thought I'd see the day Richard Montgomery cleaned up after a dance class." He almost laughed. "Neither did I." Before leaving, Lucas tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, can I stay late tomorrow? Some of the kids want extra practice for the showcase." Richard crouched, even though he didn't need to anymore. "If it's important to you, it's important to me." Lucas smiled, satisfied, and ran off toward Zoe. Richard stayed kneeling for a moment longer, staring at the scuffed floor where his son had once stumbled through his first steps. He realized that for years, his life had been ruled by meetings, deals, and deadlines. Now, it was ruled by his son's pace. And for the first time, he understood that this was the only time worth following. As they stepped out into the cool night, Diana locked the doors behind them. Richard glanced up at the painted sign above the entrance: "Freedom Steps, your rhythm, your rules." the words weren't just for the children anymore. They were for him too. The one-year anniversary of Freedom Steps felt more like a festival than a ceremony. The Bronx Center overflowed with families, balloons tied to the railings, music spilling out into the street. Food from local restaurants lined long tables, and children darted in and out, their laughter echoing through the halls. What had once been a crumbling warehouse was now alive with joy. Diana stood on stage, her navy dress simple but dignified, holding a plaque from a National Rehabilitation Association. She looked uncomfortable under the lights, but her words were steady. "This isn't my award," she said, voice clear. "It belongs to every child who dared to step forward, every parent who trusted us, and every person who believed that dignity can't be bought, it must be lived." The crowd clapped hard, but it was Lucas who stole the moment. Taller now, braces gone except for a lightweight support he used only on long days, he walked confidently to the microphone. His cane rested against the podium, ignored. "All I want to say is this," he told the room full of children and parents, his voice strong for the first time in public. "If someone tells you you can't, try anyway. Because maybe, just maybe, you'll surprise yourself." The kids in the front row cheered, their faces lit with belief. For them, Lucas wasn't just another boy. He was proof. Richard watched from the crowd, his hands still, his eyes locked on his son. He had been many things in his life, power broker, builder, billionaire, but tonight, he was just a father. And that was enough. A reporter slipped forward, voice raised above the noise. "Mr. Montgomery, what's the greatest lesson you've learned from this journey?" Richard stepped toward the microphone slowly, not as the man who once commanded cities, but as a man who had been changed by a child's shaky steps. His voice was quiet, but it carried. That power isn't control. It isn't in making people follow your path. True power is knowing when to step back and let someone else lead. The room hushed, then erupted in applause. Some clapped for the billionaire's humility. Others for the father's honesty. But most clapped for the children in the center of the hall, moving however they could, proving that every step mattered. Later that night, after the crowd drifted away and the lights dimmed, Richard found himself in the hallway lined with photographs of children who had passed through the program. Smiling faces, notes of progress, stories written in crayon and pen. At the very end, a frame sat empty. He touched the edge of it gently. Diana joined him, her heels soft on the floor. "That one's for the future," she said quietly. Richard nodded. "And it's brighter than anything I ever built." From the main hall, Lucas's laugh rang out, clear, steady, unafraid. Richard turned toward it, his face softening. "That laugh," he said, "is the only empire I need." As they stepped outside into the warm night, Richard didn't rush to the waiting car. He walked beside his son instead, matching his pace. For the first time in his life, the billionaire wasn't leading. He was following, and he finally understood that was the greatest wealth of all.